Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mondays with Maishi. This is your host, Maishi Norman from Lakewood, New Jersey. And it's just after 9 o'clock. We're going to begin another episode. This one's going to be a little bit unique, a little different than in the past. Decided to try something new rather than having a particular person featured. We are going to feature our own selves. So this is our opportunity to both ask and to share, to hypothesize and to think together, to share what we already have learned and what you may know from some of your trainings, schooling, supervision, postmaster's training. I prepared a list of ideas, questions about psychotherapy, how it works. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts. We're going to make this a gallery tonight so we can see everybody. For those of you who are new here, I want to welcome you. And for those of you who can turn on your videos, I'd like to encourage you to do so as well. And I'm sure you'll be hearing that more times as people join. So thank you all for joining. And it's nice to have you on. I hope you are all mental health professionals. There's some names that I'm not familiar with, but this is really exclusively for mental health professionals. So if you're not, I would appreciate if you log off. It's a discussion about psychotherapy. And for most of you who are not mental health professionals, you probably feel pretty bored as it is. I do want to remind everybody that Mondays with Maishi is now sponsored by okclarity.com. If you haven't checked out okclarity.com yet, do so. Do it tonight. Take a look and see if it's something that you might benefit from. okclarity.com is actually a website that hosts websites for those of us who want to get the word out, mental health professionals and other professionals in the helping field who want to get the word out and have people learn about what they do, don't want to promote themselves. So you can go on okclarity.com and they do all that work for you. They also have this really neat WhatsApp group and status where you can see things that they post, inspirational ideas and things like that. So for those of you who are psychological minded, even if you have a relative or a friend who's not a mental health professional but likes this kind of stuff, send them to okclarity.com. For you yourself, go check it out and see if it's a place that you might benefit from hosting your profile on okclarity.com. Again, for those of you who just joined, we're going to have a discussion tonight on a number of mental health topics. Actually, I should say psychotherapy topics. And if you can turn on your videos, we'd love to see you. We're going to try to make this interactive. There's nobody who is presenting except for you. So again, I'm going to have you share your thoughts, ideas, knowledge. If you're a student, now's your chance to ask questions from some of the other students on here and some of the more seasoned professionals who might be able to answer some of your questions. So let's leave this a very open group, open conversation. And again, I'm going to throw out some questions and I'm encouraging you to just unmute. No raising hands tonight. Let's just all unmute whoever has something to share. And let's engage in a rich discussion. Okay. So, okay, I wrote down a list of about 7 topics or questions so that we make sure that we have what to cover tonight. I'd like to start with let's start with the following question. This one is a cheers to Dr. Elliot Kaplan. So, hello. This question is, how important is the therapeutic alliance or the therapeutic relationship in therapy? And what does the therapeutic alliance do? So let me just explain that a bit. We know that therapeutic alliance, that the relationship between therapist and client is paramount to the success of therapy. I think, I've heard this many, many times, that the studies show that the key ingredient is the therapeutic alliance. And that's what helps clients move forward and change. So we know it's important, but I'm curious to know if there's anybody who can explain, besides Elliot Kaplan, you'll have your chance when they we'll hear from others first. But can anybody explain, how do you actually understand how it is that if you and I have a very good relationship, that in some way helps you to change and heals some of your wounds, or enables you to change some of the behaviors that you're struggling with? How does a relationship have to do with change? I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on it. Who wants to go first? Please, just no hands tonight. Just unmute and let's go. Sherry.
Being heard and seen and valued is a huge in our society.
Okay. So I want to really try to get to more of a science tonight of how this works, because many people have said that they don't see therapy as a science. It's sort of like a magic thing. Like if you have a good relationship and whatever, then things happen and change. And I actually, sort of have developed over the years a conceptualization. I think that there is something scientific to that process. Sherry, you're saying that being seen and heard and valued and validated somehow has tremendous value. Of course, we all like that. But can you explain, sort of almost step by step or in words, how do you understand or conceptualize that being seen, valued, heard helps people to become different?
Okay, so first of all, I believe in mirror neurons. We have in our brain. And so by a person being really seen by a clinician, he actually can feel seen in himself. I mean, he feels seen, and then he becomes more present to himself. Being able to be reflected back, it just gives him more of him or her, a presence of being. We are enabling the person to feel real by our presence and by our relationship with them. Okay, I use many different modalities, but just the relationship itself, and being able to hear your words and being able to hear get interpretation by connections of what are you letting them get interpretation of, see themselves in different ways. It's huge. It's a gift. That's one of the things that changes the person.
Okay, so let me see if I understand what you're saying, and I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on this, everybody's thoughts on this. But I think what you're saying is that it creates more of an existence, that the client feels like he or she exists more, because if he's being seen, then he obviously is, right? So like you said, it mirrors back to him. So he says, hey, I'm being seen, then I can see myself. I can experience myself as existing.
Right.
Okay. And if I experience myself as existing, then what? How does that affect myself?
Then he or she is real. And once the real, they can also realize through the relationship, they make an impact on someone else. And therefore they can start reflecting on how they impact the world also.
Fascinating. So it's now they exist, and if they exist, then they can influence. If they believe they can influence, and that propels them to proceed and influence, move forward, and actually act in the world.
Because they will see through the relationship that they're making an impact on the clinician himself, right? Making the clinician can reflect, and therefore he can say, "Oh, my behavior really impacts, and I could be respected also, and then I could get more insight." And
excellent. Okay, so I'm just to repeat the question for those of you who just joined. The question was: we know that the therapeutic alliance is extremely valuable and important in the therapeutic process. The question really was, what does it do? Can we try to break down into a science, somewhat of a science? What is having a close relationship with somebody? What does that do? That somehow heals people or makes people better. So Sherry's, sharing her perception on what it is that's going on. And I imagine, Sherry, that when you're sitting in the room with the client, you're kind of observing and watching this process unfold. The person is becoming more person, becoming more, existing through that relationship. And so I imagine that's how you see it. Is there anybody who has a different perception, wants to add or say something? Please.
Something else.
I think that
Nechama, go ahead.
Okay. I think also the concept of modeling that, a lot of the clients that I work with are actually a lot of emotion dysregulation, a lot of young adults that are coming from dysfunctional families and still living at home, like the 22-year-olds, all of that. And I think the fact that the therapeutic relationship is boundaried and we have the parameters of that, we're modeling what can a relationship look like within also validating and doing the boundaries. Like I always tell my clients, if I did one or the other, I wouldn't be helping you. But, we need the validation and the change. And I think modeling that kind of relationship allows them to then do that with other people in their lives.
So you're saying having them experience what a balanced, let's just call it a balanced relationship is, enables them to glean unconscious insight as to what a balanced relationship should look like, which enables them to then go and execute that in other relationships.
And some of it's unconscious and some of it might even be conscious.
They may sometimes actually be able to identify what it is that you're doing or that's happening, and then they can apply that. Well, obviously, if it's conscious, they can apply that. But
Right.
I'm talking obviously on a deeper level as well.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Beautiful. Yosef Mendel, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to add, I think that from a motivational interviewing perspective, if I understand it correctly, the idea that people are eternally good and basically whole and healthy mentally, by just being there and allowing them to flourish, by just cultivating that relationship, we allow that internal good and internal wholesomeness to come out, and that's how they heal through the relationship.
Okay. Does anybody else have thoughts on this besides me? And for those of you who just joined, the question that we're asking is, how do we understand the mechanism of the therapeutic alliance to induce change? Okay. Elliot, do you want to share some of your perspective here?
Sure. You're using an interesting word. You're calling it a science, and generally in psychology, it's kind of known we're pseudoscience, meaning that we try to be a science and we have evidence-based studies, but in science, and I know most we've had this discussion before where we've talked about. In real science, there's an orbit's gravity model. I mean, that goes back to atoms, the solar system, all sorts of science comes back to that piece of the atom. And the atom is basically orbits that go around the center of gravity. So in the work that I've done, I've realized that the orbits represent behavior, and usually behavior that's repetitive. So addiction is repetitive, something that the person does again and again. Mental health disorder is something, again, they do again and again. Repetitive criminal behavior, family conflict. Everybody has family conflict, once in a while, but when it happens again and again, in my mind, I'm looking at an orbit. So for some people, they have all four things at once. And when I drew the model out, what I saw was an orbit's gravity model, but I didn't know what was in the middle. So I said, all right, it looks a lot like an atom, and an atom has gravity. So what could gravity be in terms of therapy? And gravity basically is what attaches. Yeah, gravity is essentially attachment. So for myself, I'm a lot of my interventions look very cavalier and just kind of off the cuff. But in my mind, what I simply do is I'm simply working on the gravity. I'm working on the attachment with the client. And the attachment is the alliance. So my entire focus really in the therapy is around the alliance And as strange as it sounds, I'm not even invested in changing behavior anymore, because as soon as I change that sense of gravity, the behavior will literally change automatically.
Mhm. Yeah, you're speaking it out from your science-based conceptualization,
Correct.
it feels abstract when you hear it, because it's not talking about the person and the psychology of the person. It's talking more about, atoms and orbits. So
Right.
and attachment as being
Right.
at the center.
Right.
I don't
But
know
it's
if
important just to recognize that the orbit is really repetitive. It could be repetitive behavior, repetitive thinking, repetitive feelings, something repetitive that happens again and again. And that's basically what orbits do. They just happen again and again.
okay.
Um, so it turns out, so I find that the attachment is, as I've mentioned, 99.85 of treatment.
Okay, so we heard from Sherry, we heard from Yosef Bendel, and we heard from Nechama. I think these things are, all very valuable in the attachment and the alliance between therapist and client to make things change. I might add to the list, maybe it was mentioned in what Nechama said, modeling, but I think also working the relationship is very important. And again, maybe this is what Nechama included in what Nechama said. But when we struggle through the relationship with clients, when they reenact old patterns and behaviors within the context of our relationship. So in the past, they had been distanced because of negative relationship behaviors that they engaged in. We have an opportunity as the therapist to actually strengthen and move closer. Sometimes I like to give an analogy of what I learned in Kung Fu. So there's karate and there's different kinds of martial arts, and one of them was Kung Fu. When I was a kid, I took a couple of Kung Fu lessons that didn't make it very far. And one of the things that they taught us is when, contrary to other forms of martial arts, and some martial arts, they teach you when somebody throws a punch, they teach you how to deflect. Okay. In Kung Fu, they teach you when somebody throws a punch, how to actually use the force, use the energy of the punch to your benefit. So the person throws the punch at you and you actually receive the punch. You pull the punch towards you, which pulls him off balance, and then you can sort of sweep, kick him and sweep his legs out from underneath him, right? So they teach you kind of rolling with the resistance or embracing the adversity. So when a client throws a punch of, let's say, an insult or frustration or anger or rage at the therapist, we now have an opportunity to react or respond in ways that are contrary to what they are expecting because of their historical behaviors. In the past, when they insulted or raged at somebody, that person pushed them away, or fought them, combated them. And now we have an opportunity to actually pull them closer and say, you're exhibiting or conveying a lot of rage towards me. You're angry about something. I want to understand it more. I want to understand what I'm doing that's hurtful to you. I want to understand what your experience of it is, right? And by doing so, but each time the client throws the rage at you, if each time it's soothed by being understood and accepted, okay? So somehow that alliance, that closeness that you're developing with the client will reduce their rage and their negative behaviors. So again, the question is why? And I think the answer is because they can learn that they're acceptable. The rage is acceptable because it's been accepted by you. And once their rage is acceptable, as I always say, they're not as conflicted or frustrated by the rage that they have. So if I'm upset at you, I don't have to rage at you. I can say, hey, that was hurtful. Could you not say that? Or I can ask you to do something different. Usually when people are raging, it's because they're feeling that. And then there's another conflict on top of that. That conflict might be, I can't tell the person. It might be, people always say this to me. People are always hurting me in this way. And so that conflict, that tension is really what brings the rage out and has them just explode towards the other person. But if each time they rage, and I think Dr. Kaplan would say, if we encourage them to rage at you, if I would encourage the client, if I would say, hey, every time I say something that's not to your liking, just shoot me down, take me on and destroy me for it, because I tend to do things like that. So what we've done is we've embraced the client's dark side, right? And we've said, your dark side is great, bring it on. So now they feel less conflicted about it. And because they're less conflicted about it, they're calmer, in a calmer state of mind, and they can now act in a way that's different. So I think, besides all the things that were mentioned in the value of the therapeutic alliance, I think that the relationship itself gives the client a sense of calm and enables the client to learn that he can relate to other people because he's finally feeling accepted and liked, which makes him feel likable. I know Sherry spoke about feeling seeable or visible, right? And I'm talking about now feeling likable and acceptable.
Mhm.
Okay, so that would be my addition to that thing. Any other thoughts or comments, or we'll move on to the next thing?
I have a question. Can you hear me? Yes.
Mhm.
So when you allow a client to rage, and if you have a borderline personality disorder who really doesn't know boundaries,
I don't,
and
by the way. I don't have borderline personality disorder.
I said if you have a client who has borderline personality,
Just
I
for the
doubt-
record.
I doubt that you don't have a client who has a borderline personality disorder, but they really don't know when they hurt someone, or even they need to hurt someone to feel real sometimes. You still need to teach them in some way. Ouch, that hurts. Like, they need to understand that.
So again, I think there there would be arguments made. There would be some analysts. I'm guessing we have Hannah Mark on here, so I'm eyeing her out of the corner of my eye to see whether she'll agree with this. But I think there would be some analysts who might argue and say you never have to actually directly address it. I'm not sure. That's my guess. But I also think, I tend to eventually confront clients on their behaviors and then gauge to see their reactions and whether they could handle and tolerate, what I'm sharing with them. And sometimes people with borderline personality are tricky because they'll accept it from you today, they'll bring it back tomorrow and kill you on it. But I think that it's really okay for us to separate, just like with children, and whenever we do parenting, whenever I teach parenting to parents. So one of the ideas is, of course, you could teach your child that they can't speak to you in a certain way, or they can't do certain behaviors, and you needn't teach it to them necessarily in the moment that they do it. To the contrary, if the child is yelling at you and saying, I hate you, you're a stupid mother, you're such an idiot, and you say back to them, don't you talk to me that way, son, I don't want to hear that from you. You're talking on deaf ears, right? We're much better off saying, okay, I see you're really upset about what happened. You're really mad. I feel badly that you're, that this thing happened and that you're in so much pain. And, I'm sorry about that. And then you could go back tomorrow to the child and say, hey, remember you got really upset at me for that thing that happened. And, while that was going on, you called me an idiot and said, I'm stupid at, could we come up with a different plan for when you're that upset? Because that's not so respectful. And it's, what nurtured heart approach would call giving very little energy to it. You make it in passing, you say it in passing, you comment on it, and that's how your child will learn. They're not going to learn in the moment of rage. So with the client who's behaving towards me in that way, I think that the most effective thing in the moment is to just create a lot of space for it and allow it to be, and be curious about it. And then, at some other point when we're talking about when the client is either discussing their challenges, their interpersonal challenges that they have with others, or at some other point where things are just going very well and calm and smoothly, we could bring this up again, bring it back to the room and say, again, if it's in the context of interpersonal relationships, we could share with them what our experiences. I've had some experiences with you in the past where I felt somewhat intimidated. What? Me intimidating? All right. Well, it reminds me of the time that you raged at me at that time. Now, oh, but you were so mean to me. Well, that could be, and and then we'll share, what may have been an alternative way that other people may have responded, or how she could respond differently. And you sort of like drop it in. You drop in these little teaching moments and things like that. Or if it's not in the context of interpersonal relationships or something that happened, I might still bring it up and say, it's happened a couple of times that I felt somewhat intimidated by you, and I'm wondering what that's about. And and then we would go into why they need to intimidate me if they're trying to get a message across versus sharing it with me in a very pure, transparent communication.
Nice, thank you.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the next question. Let's first decide what the next question is going to be. Actually, let's jump. I want to ask a question directed, I guess, towards Hannah, Mark, and anyone, of course, can answer it. But Hannah, is there ever a time, or when is there a time that analysts or people who practice psychodynamic oriented therapy will use behavioral interventions, or will tell a client that this and this thing will help, rather than just allowing the client to come to all understanding on their own? Is there a time that they would say, okay, maybe start putting on your alarm clock and trying to get up by 9 o'clock?
I it's a broad question. Offhand, I can't think of a context where I would give that kind of concrete advice, but I do find that when you and this is, I think, what people have been speaking about, when you work in the transference, which is what everyone was talking about, Elliot, you, Sherry, and a patient is reacting or responding to you as if you were their bad mother or their bad father, and over time you respond to them in a way that's genuine, real, and appropriate. And you, as you said, you hold these frightened, rageful, bad, quote unquote, parts of them, and they end up feeling held by you. Over time, they themselves also interjecting your good mind, your developed ego, will solve these difficulties for themselves. The question here becomes, I think, well, what does it mean that the patient is constantly waking up late? And here's where I think that psychoanalytic understanding, or the understanding of development, the various schools of thought of development can be very helpful to us. I'll take your example. Patient doesn't want to get up. They want their bed. They want their warmth. They want their mother. They don't want to go out into the cold world and meet its challenges, and they know they're going to fail, and they know things are bad are going to happen to them, and that's where they're in treatment, because they're not able to manage or negotiate life well. So they want their mother, they want to stay there in their cozy bed, and they don't want the alarm to ring and jangle, and now they have to get up and face that challenging, difficult world and go out and fail again. It's okay for us to put this into words in the way that the patient can receive it. And they're digesting what we said. Their realization, their self-awareness is enough to bring them forward. And after you say something, let's say you make an interpretation like that, it's going to trigger inside them all sorts of things. Also, if you hit it right, their own process and their own verbalizations. I'm digressing a little bit now. But we tend to listen very closely to a patient's associations. What's the underlying thread in what they're saying? But simply verbalizing feelings, verbalizing mental state, putting things into words is so important, because once it's in words, they can start to think for themselves.
Okay, so you're making a point, which is really addressing another one of my questions, which is how do clients change organically? And I think I'm hearing you say that if you start to make these interpretations, right, and start to understand and give credence and give context, which has now become a dirty word, by the way, to some people know what I'm saying.
Context determines meaning. It better not become a
It's
dirty word.
very dirty word now.
Oh, bad, bad.
You
But it
didn't get
depends
your
on the context.
reference to
It
the-
depends
to
on,
what
it's
just
not a,
happened in Congress. I'm gonna private message you.
okay. So, people will begin to, okay, so it hit me now. Why did I wake up at 9 o'clock? Because I really want my mommy. And I really want that warmth and comfort that my bed is providing. That's sort of me snuggling with my mommy. And I don't want to be thrown into the dark, dirty world, scary world where mommy leaves go of me. And now I might explore, what was my relationship with mommy like? Was it not safe and that's why I want her? Was it very safe and that's why I want her? Or was I parentified and she needed me and that's why I want her? And that will lead to all sorts of shaking up, of the kishkas inside, which will help to produce or propel change. So the question I was really asking was the opposite. Would there be a time and place that analysts or psychodynamic therapists would at any point say, it's time for you to do it, or I want you to try it? That's
Okay,
really my question.
Okay, right. I understood that. I took that the particular example you gave though was the context in which I saw that particular thing didn't seem suitable, but I can tell
Okay.
you that behavioral modification, we're not wedded to one way of thinking. I cured a very troublesome tic in a phobia, excuse me, well, tics also, but a phobia in an 11-year-old boy. I'd been working with him for 2 years, and we'd done, and he had a very troublesome phobia. He got terrified when someone wanted to take his picture. Where was this coming from? Well, in talking to his mother, it happened to have been something she had mentioned. They were away, and they were on some country road. They were walking, and a tourist took his younger sister's picture, and the mother freaked because she had all sorts of fantasies about, child porn and who knows what. And he was there. She was 5, he was 7, and seeing his mother freak when his sister's picture was taken communicated to him that getting your picture taken was dangerous. He conflated these two things. All right. So then, we'd been working for 2 years and the path became kind of clear. I said to him, will you let me take a picture of you using my phone? And he said, he was very nervous about it. And finally he let me. He said, can I erase it if I want to? I said, sure. So I took the picture and he erased it. But giving him that control, we did this 2 or 3 times, and the phobia went away because it had been a result of a conflation that he had made as a child, and the behavioral working through giving him full control. He could erase it if he wanted to. He could, I could send it to him if he wanted me to, whatever he wanted. You know, when you cure a child's phobia like that, it's this, by the way, was undergirded by 2 years of very deep work. So we had a relationship. He trusted me.
Mhm.
He was willing and able with me to experiment with this. I mean, he ran out when they were taking the
So
last
Hannah,
picture.
I think what you're saying is that after you've identified, or once you've identified and done sort of the deeper work, now the only thing that was left was a little bit of exposure. And a little bit of exposure will go a long way when the defenses have already been removed or at least mitigated.
Exactly.
Mhm.
I couldn't have said it better. And that's exactly what happens.
Okay, so this is a really important lesson for us, you know, for even for us, those of us doing, you know, strictly-ish dynamic work, although no one's pure these days probably, but you know, we've been so influenced. But when we reach a point where the only thing that's left is a little exposure, with some, I would probably argue and say some clients will be able to do it on their own. They've already made so much sense of it that now it's like, oh, it's no big deal. I get what's going on. I'm having a reaction or an aversion to something that happened to me then.
Mhm.
It's not then anymore. It's not actually, my mother actually wasn't freaked out about pictures. That was a very isolated circumstance. And it's not. Now I can go and do it on my own. And sometimes they may need a little nudge or a push from the therapist to say, let's do the exposure work. Is that about right?
Yes, I think so. He wasn't in for this particular problem. I mean, he suffered from depression. There was much more going on for him. But the relationship and the fact that he had become developed enough to be able to feel empowered to say to me, I would like to have control of this. I would like to be able to erase it if I want to. It is in his particular case was what enabled this to work, but it's exactly right what you're saying. And even in a situation where that little nudge from the therapist, you know, that little we ourselves in our own treatment said, gee whiz, I don't have to do that anymore, you know. I can experiment with being different. I can okay. But yes, I believe that behavioral work has a great deal of value.
Okay. So I'm wondering if anybody else has anything to share, any thoughts or comments to share on this. Again, you're just going to jump in if you do, and if not, we'll keep talking. But please interject if you have something to share. Chana and everybody, I want to ask you what you think about seeing therapy on some level, or in many cases, as a sort of reparenting process. Okay, and as we see it as a reparenting process, so we're raising the child, right? This child, rather than, you know, instead of coming out with a blank slate and being developed from the get-go, is coming with a wounded slate, you know, with a damaged slate, with a black slate. And we are the objects or the attachment figures who are reenacting these relationships and working them through. Would there be room to say, I'm curious to hear what you think about this, again, because oftentimes my conceptualization of what's happening in sessions, especially with those who present, you know, with very underdeveloped egos or undeveloped egos. So I see this process happening. I see them maturing. I see them going from being little children with primitive defenses and primitive reactions to things to becoming more tolerant, becoming more sophisticated, becoming more mature. And would it be reasonable to say that in that framework of raising the child, that the same application that I might use when raising an actual child, which is now we're at a point where my son has to make a phone call to a friend or to somebody, and he's scared of making the phone calls. Now he needs a push over the cliff. He needs a nudge. Would that be this? Would I be able to apply that same conceptualization with clients who I may not ordinarily use behaviors or push behaviors on, but at that point where it's just, I had it this week where I very deliberately looked at a client in the eye and said, okay, well, now you're at a point where I think I could say, get over it, or something like that. I don't remember the exact wording, but it's like, it's positioning. It's not something I would almost ever tell a client, but when the client is right there and they need to hear from their parent, their mentor, somebody, get over it, meaning you can do this, then that would be an appropriate or a reasonable framework. What do you guys say to that? Curious. Any thoughts?
I don't want to, like hog this, but I think you're raising a very good point. Very often, patients will cling to maladaptive ways of being or ways of relating because they are familiar. We all know that change, even when it beckons and it's positive and it'll open doors, can cause anxiety. And there have been times when I said, you don't have to do this anymore, or you can leave this behind, or are you strong enough to leave this behind? What do you think? Do you think you're strong enough now to leave this behind? And get them thinking along the lines of doing that. Yes, I think that that's very often appropriate, especially someone you've been seeing for years. You've seen their change. And like you said, can you help them like over that gap by asking them to question themselves? I think you're strong enough to leave this behind. What do you think? I think so. Yeah.
So you're sharing it in a more gentle and delicate way, and I wonder if that's stylistic as a parent. For us Brooklyn people, we would say, forget about it and get over it, right? Or is there something very deliberate about the way you're saying it that's more empowering or something for the client?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, kind of to you.
Boy, I find that especially where we're dealing with anxiety, the anxiety of change, that gentleness is called for. Yes.
Right. Okay. Any other thoughts on this before we move on to the next thing?
Well, I think that part of it is we have to decide. I think as a parent, you can have expectations for a child. And I think that you can push the child as the parent. My question is, as the therapist, I mean, Carl Rogers, if you watch Carl Rogers' videos, I mean, I'm always amazed because he just sits there, he's like accepting warmth, empathy, genuineness, unconditional positive regard. He avoids power struggles. And I think that in and of itself is a therapeutic stance, because as soon as the therapist has an agenda of where they think the client should go, I think that's a problem. Or it could turn into a problem, because now it's you against that client.
So do you feel that there's never a place or a position that a client is in after having done a certain amount of work that it would be appropriate to just give them that nudge and push them over the cliff? Because I understand your point in general, right? Which I think many of us agree with. And that's the general, I would say that the general, my general conceptualization of what's happening in the therapy room is what you're describing. That,
Right.
And again, that's for another time, exactly the science of how that works. But, why Carl Rogers was successful if all he did was sit there and listen and make the person feel good. I believe there is a science to that. But do you not think that there's a point where a client, and I worked on a client today, using paradoxical interventions, and he ended up becoming very serious in the session. He was in straight up avoidance for many sessions, and he ended up becoming very serious and doing a lot of work in this session. And I was debating, whether I should roll with his work or whether I should push back, because I know that next time he might be avoidant again, and tell him that he has to be more avoidant. So is there a time where a place where a client gets to a space where he's raised himself to the level where he's actually more motivated to do the work, or more
Right.
motivated to move forward?
Right. I mean, I guess my style is I do use a lot of humor. And I think if a client has reached a certain point where it seems that they can make that next step, what I'll very often say to the client is, it looks like you're ready to take that next step, but I really hope you don't. I don't want you to take that step. And of course, they'll be surprised. And I'll say, well, why don't you want me to take that step? Well, if you take that step, then you might end therapy. Then you might get to the next level. And then I'm going to lose business. I don't really want to lose your business. I like you where you are. You're fine just the way you are. You don't have to change. And just by letting the client know that they literally don't have to change, that allows them to on their own. It's not that, oh, you pushed me to change.
It frees
it's like
them.
they're making that decision to
They're
change.
making their own decision, and it frees up
Right.
that tension. Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. I'd like to share an intervention that I did a couple of weeks ago with a number of clients, two specific cases. I believe that I've done this before, but I don't know why the intervention entered into my mind, and I used it, with just a couple of clients in the same time frame. The results were astonishing, and I'm curious to hear, anybody's interpretation on why this happened. I have two clients. One of them is a male who does a tremendous amount of masturbating, questionable sex addiction. Very, very obsessed with nudity and sexuality and things like that, but is very complacent masturbating, although he believes it's wrong, but he's sort of comfortable with it. He prefers it to intercourse. And a woman who overeats. Oh, actually, besides overeating, she also is gluten free. She's really completely intolerant to gluten, but constantly eats foods with gluten, kills herself. Her whole digestive system gets messed up. Her moods are terrible and very erratic. She has to sleep a lot, and she's very, very deeply affected by it. And she's been, yelling at me that I have to help her with this, and why can't she stop, and why does she just stop for a week and 2 weeks, and then she feels so good, and then boom, she goes back, to eating. So I used the same intervention with the two of them, and the intervention was as follows. It's a kind of like double negative intervention, so I need you to hold on, hang in there with me. The intervention was, can you respect yourself enough? Do you have enough respect for yourself? Or are you able to respect yourself enough that when you want to do something badly enough, that you need not do it? Again, can you respect yourself enough that when you want to do something so badly, when you have an urge, you have enough respect for yourself that you don't have to do it just because you have that urge? That was the intervention that I used on both of them. I said to her, do you have enough respect for yourself, or can you have enough respect for yourself that when you feel that urge, that burning urge to eat gluten, that you can respect yourself enough to not have to cave to that urge? So sort of like externalizing the urge as an outside monster. And do you respect yourself more than you respect your urge? Is the question. And the same thing with the masturbation. Can you respect yourself enough that just because you feel an urge or an interest to masturbate, but you have enough respect for yourself that you don't have to do it? And both of them came back the next week. I had forgotten about the intervention on both of them, because I've said things like this before. I know it sort of throws people's brains around a little bit and causes some chaos. But both of them came back, and without me asking them, reported. They said, you said something last week that made a tremendous impression. She came back and said that for the past week, I haven't touched gluten. And every time I was faced with gluten, I found myself very, very empowered, saying, like, I can have enough respect for myself that just because I want it doesn't mean I have to have it. And he came back and said that, he on a number of occasions that he felt an urge to masturbate, he didn't do it. He didn't completely cut it out, but on a number of occasions he didn't do it. So I found this to be extremely powerful, and I'm wondering if anybody can sort of explain how and why this particular intervention was effective.
Can I just ask, could it have been that the fact that they stopped may have come also from an unhealthy place where they have an urge to listen to authority maybe, and because it came or better to say they have they're basically shaming and guilting themselves, so that's why they're not doing it, versus that they came to a level of respect where to themselves that they're no longer doing it.
So again, if I could hear if I were to tell them to stop doing it and you want to make that argument, then I can understand that. I have no agenda whatsoever to get them to stop. I just was asking them, just sort of pondering, with them. Do you have enough respect for yourself that when you feel like you have an urge to do something, that you don't have to do it because you have that much respect for yourself? It was just pondering, it wasn't, I'm not telling them to not do it. This woman's been complaining about her eating gluten for a year already, and it's not something that I actually directly engage with. It's her choice to eat it or not to eat it. It was just a question more of the self.
I guess I have to clarify more what I said before. My question was more, is it possible that now that this person is basically shaming themselves, not from what you said, but more that they're now telling themselves, oh, they're basically forcing themselves rather coming from it from a healthy perspective, and if maybe that's not from a healthy perspective, maybe it's not going to be lasting, as someone asked.
I don't know, maybe. I guess it's a possibility.
Sounded to me like it was hypnotic suggestion, right?
Like, I'm sorry?
It was a hypnotic suggestion. What you just
I'm
gave.
honestly not familiar with how
Okay.
those
It
work.
was definitely a hypnotic suggestion, and you gave them permission to respect themselves.
Yeah.
And you said it twice, so that reinforced the ability. My clinician asked me if I could respect myself. You gave them permission to even think about respecting themselves enough to do it.
Okay.
So,
Sherry, are you down to giving a talk on hypnosis?
NLP, a little bit, I can.
You can?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
NLP? Okay, let's talk off the air.
Mhm.
Cool.
Yeah, we love that. So Moshe, I think it's what you said in the beginning. That's the key, that basically to see it like a little monster. Like sometimes when a person has a habit, they see it part of themselves. So that's what I am. And you externalize that. So it's like the habit versus you, or do you respect more? The respect is in the middle. So I think externalizing it and separating themselves as self from the problem is probably what was helpful. I would
Okay.
think.
Moshe, can I ask a question?
Sure. Malka, who is that? Yeah.
Malka, yeah, sorry. How long did it last for? Did it last for
Yeah.
just a week? Or
Harold
did it
asked me that question also. I honestly don't know, because last week they came in and said that it was effective, and this week I saw one of them, the other one actually canceled the session today. So I don't know, and when the other one came in, I didn't even ask, because again, my focus on the sessions is not on their masturbation or gluten. So it's not, it's just something that happened to have come up. I happen to have shared. They happen to have come back and reported, but I didn't bring it up and ask them again. But it's a good question, and maybe I'll.
So I could see how it could work with the gluten. That
Mhm.
makes a lot of sense, because I have the overeating is something I'm familiar with. The masturbation is curious to me, because you said he prefers the masturbation over actual sex.
Mhm.
So I just wonder if there was like a trauma in terms of intimacy at some point.
Yeah,
If
there for sure was, but that's
Yeah,
yeah.
so because if there's a trauma, I don't know I mean, that's a great question to ask in therapy, and I want to give you a lot of credit. I'm not taking away from your but I don't think that that one question is what's going to really solve it. We've got to do something deeper to really solve it on a deeper level.
Okay, I'm not asking about solving it. I'm only asking whether anybody could give some kind of explanation as to what it is that happened that was so powerful. Go ahead, Shayna.
So I the way that like I tend to reframe it in my mind when I'm hearing this is as you are someone who is worthy of respect. You as a human, you are respectable as a person, right? Regardless of the behavior. You have this behavior that like you kind of want to change, but you also really feel like you have to do it. Whether you do the behavior or not, you are a worthy human being, right? So that already takes away so much of the like the shame and the guilt associated with the behavior. That like it's not that like, can I do this behavior so that I can respect myself? Because it sounds like in both cases it's something that they really feel like they really ought to be doing, or not doing rather, like, but and there's probably a lot of shame and guilt tied to that. So I can, doing the behavior wouldn't make me someone I can't respect, right? Can I respect myself, right? Can I see myself as someone who's a valuable human being? And then with that, like, also now that I've like taken away some of the layers that make it hard to work through, to like get through these urges, can I cope with that discomfort? Am I someone who's able to cope with that? I don't know, that's how I tend to like.
So you're kind of
hear it.
reframing the question and putting it into statements, right? You're saying that essentially what they're hearing, or what I'm implying is you are respectable in spite of the fact that you may sometimes do those behaviors, right? And because you're respectable, you needn't be so ashamed. And once you're not so ashamed, then the conflict or the shame and guilt, the conflict of tension, whatever terminology you want to use, is mitigated, and that makes it easier for them to make a better choice.
Perhaps, and like and I think that doesn't negate any of the other work that you're doing. Like as Malka pointed out, how long does this one particular thing last? Like any one particular like thing that happened, any particular instance in therapy isn't going to be the thing that lasts forever. But it is
I think
part
it
of
could
like relearning
learning the
that
self. Yeah.
or learning that I don't have to judge myself, learning that I'm a valuable human being.
Right. I think these things can make permanent impressions on a person, meaning he can now feel that he is respectable, and that some of these reframes really carry a person forever, for the rest of their lives. Absolutely.
Yeah. And if you said it that time, you probably said it and will continue to say it in many other ways. And they learn that over time in therapy. And that might have just been one way that kind of was more like made an impression on those people in regards to these behaviors that they had a lot of shame about.
Okay. Thank you. Yehuda.
So I would just add to that. I think what Malcolm was saying before is very powerful. But I a lot of times it's a trauma history, and it sounds like there was a trauma history over here. But sometimes if someone spent a lot of time watching pornography, that may give them an attraction to be more interested in masturbating or fantasizing rather having real sex, because for them things became boring. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind. And I think part of, and similar to what was just being said, the way to help that might be to humanize things and to really help them learn what's going on for them in their own process, and what do they exist, and what are the things that I want as a person. So it's sort of helping them first of all connect to the real thing, but it's also learning who they are, and that's why they're able to connect to themselves.
Okay. But
Also,
okay,
Moshe, I think it was really interesting how you said, do you respect yourself? You also made an assumption that there was respect for themselves. And I believe, even though I'm not in your therapy room, you must have, that assumption must have came out from you before, and you gave them this almost like a confidence, like, yeah, I need to respect myself, or I have respect for myself, because you just assumed it. And sometimes, and in a good way, like, I think that was a good thing. But you also gave them that thing, like, wait, do I respect for myself? Do I have it? Like, I work with a lot of people who don't have respect for themselves.
it's not a question of do, it's a question of can.
Can,
Can you respect yourself?
but
Or do,
they decided the answer was yes, at least for that week.
correct. It was a yes.
So whatever that respect was, the shame piece was kind of like, if there's like a scale, you were able to like weigh it down a little bit. I don't know if that makes
Right.
sense what I'm doing with my hands, but
Maybe what you're adding is when I said, can you respect yourself? Maybe there's a presupposition that I can respect them that much. I think that's what
yeah.
you're sharing.
I think when we give these like subconscious messages to our clients, it's so powerful. I believe in you. I know you could do this. I respect you. These little messages that we say is what builds them up and what gives them that empowerment to change the behavior that they really have come to us that they wanted to change that behavior to begin with. And in the way you formulated that question was very empowering to those two individuals. So you did a good job.
Thank you. Okay, Hannah, go ahead.
Hey, I think what was so profound about what you did when you said this was that you were picking up on the fact that both of these two patients take the masochistic position, and that they're continuing to masturbate and feel shame and guilt. The shame and guilt is actually the point. The point is the self-punishment. The point is being in this masochistic position toward, and your behavior towards yourself, towards society. And the same thing with this woman who eats gluten. She shouldn't do it, but why is she compelled to do it? Because she's compelled somehow to be bad, to do something bad, wrong, something, right? Right. And the punishment, the shame and guilt turn out to be the punishment. And when you said this to them, you said you were essentially opening up a question. Can you think about not taking the masochistic position? Can you think about having worth as a person and not having to be always on the bottom, not have to be someone that feels as if you're bad and you're wrong and you deserve it, and you deserve all the bad feelings that are going to come from this. Can you think of yourself differently, not being in the
I
masochistic?
really like what you're saying. I really
Mhm.
appreciate that point. I think you're really touching on something here, it's almost opening up their eyes to there's a more respectable way to live than one of I am only deserving of pain, of perpetuation, of negativity,
Failure, being
failure,
bad.
all kinds of bad
Yes.
things. Beautiful.
Can I
Sarah,
jump
go ahead.
in?
Sure.
Yeah, I think it was a very cool intervention. And I think for me, perhaps like the natural next step, speaking of what would help the positive effects of this intervention last longer, is to ask, can you respect, and this is more of like more of an IFS angle, can you respect the part that has a need to engage in these behaviors? Like how is it serving you? How is it functioning? How is it helping you? So I think that side of it also needs to be respected. Perhaps like Hannah said, there is that self-hatred piece, and the addiction served to sort of like numb yourself to the feelings, feel better.
So I agree. I agree with that. I think that work is already precedes. In other words, I used an intervention that the normal course of therapy would look to understand the value of what Bruce Ecker calls the pro-symptoms, or the negative, you know, the negative behaviors or maladaptive behaviors that people do. From the get-go, that's what we're looking for. We're looking to respect those parts. I think I was doing a sort of like backwards question, where it's like, usually the question would be, can you respect yourself enough that if you want to masturbate, you can? Can you respect yourself enough that if you want to eat gluten, you can? I want it, so why shouldn't I? I want to yell at my parents, so why shouldn't I? Right? That would sort of be the natural course of a question. And over here, I'm asking that, I'm going backwards, right? I'm scratching like that, and I'm saying, can you respect yourself enough that even that when you want to, you don't have to, because you have enough respect for yourself? I think, Sarah, what you're saying is much more fundamental and would precede this kind of work. So I think you're right in that, you know, we want to make sense of the parts that act maladaptively, and we want to respect them, and we want to deeply understand them, so that, you know, because that itself will mitigate a lot of the tension. There's so many different words that everyone's using that mean the same thing, the tension or the shame and guilt, you know? So yeah,
Right.
I agree
I
with
also
you.
think, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I also think that sometimes, I've seen it with clients, like you have, who was speaking? It was, now I can't see who was speaking. Whoever said about the parts, it's really interesting. I actually look at it I always see it the opposite ways. I think it was Sarah that said about the parts. What I see with clients is they can't respect themselves because of this one part. And I've done the opposite, where I've challenged clients like, okay, just because you have this one part, or you've done this one particular thing, can you still respect and still think the rest of the things are very worthy? But you know, and I've had clients that really, they just only hone in on the one thing about them that's in their mind. I'm not saying it is or isn't. In their mind is not perfect. And if that one thing isn't perfect, then it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It doesn't matter what all the rest of it does. And so the fact that you say, can you respect yourself enough? It's a really interesting twist on it, because it's showing that they have respect for the rest of who they are outside of those two behaviors.
Okay.
Even if they don't respect that particular behavior.
Okay. Let's go to Avram. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I think your question is a bit hard to answer, because I think there's a context, if that makes sense, right? It's not just you say one thing and let's analyze what you just said. I think that there's a whole relationship going on, and there's a whole therapy going on that we need to consider to really understand this statement. I mean, we can guess and try to understand, you know, what variables are involved to create such change, at least short-term change. So I think that's the first thing to think about. My guess is, this is only a guess, is that I think that there's a certain level of connection between you and the client, right? There's a certain deep relationship happening here. And you know, let's say I would come over to that client and say that, it wouldn't have the same effect, right? It's because it's coming from you. It's like coming from someone that they really value, someone that really, when they say something, it really means something. So I think it kind of like hit a chord within them. You know, they really felt it. It was an experiential it was like an experience when they heard that from you. Like, it really, like, wait a second, I am valuable, right? And it was a feeling more than just words.
Mhm. I think somebody made that point before. I think Malcolm may have made that point before, but yes, it's possible. And notwithstanding, you know, I still, even if that was a necessary variable, I still, you know, wanted to understand how it did what it did. But I appreciate that.
Yeah, okay.
I appreciate that point, that you may not be able to do this on the first session, within the first 15 minutes with a client. You know, if I were to meet a client the first time and they say I'm struggling with masturbation, and I would say, do you respect yourself enough that just because you feel, you know, that when you feel you have an urge, you have enough respect for yourself that you don't have to do it. You might be right on that.
No, but you were with them for a long time. Just the way you talked about them, it
Yeah.
sounded like this was definitely not an intake. You
Yeah.
need to have the therapeutic relationship and bond has to be formed before any of this could be impactful.
Yeah,
Just the way
yeah.
that Moshe presented it was obvious to me that this
Yes,
was
yes.
a relationship with
That
him.
wasn't a first or second session. Right.
No, it was, I thought that was obvious.